I want to start with a quote that's the end of a quote. We've been forced to imagine a new future with possibilities for freedom. I will return to this quote and fill it in for you a little later, but that's where I want to start. Because you see, my friends, we were made for freedom, because that's where God is. The love that is God knows no boundaries. It is infinite and abundant. Anyone who has been touched by God's amazing grace and mercy knows of God's infinite and abundant love. Even me, the sinner asks. Yes, God says, even you. Yet we are boundaried. We have skin, we have time, we have place. My skin, your skin holds our blood in. It would not stay with us if it didn't have a nice seal on the outside. And it's because of time and place that we have found each other here, a very specific boundary. We know that these boundaries limit our freedom. We cannot be anywhere all the time, all places all the time, unlike the living God who can. Unlike the living God, we can't move as the wind. God is boundaryless. So in the paradox of truth, we must create boundaries for our boundaried selves in order to live into the unboundaried freedom of God. This is why God gave us the law. The law handed down to Moses and then built upon, beyond those 10 commandments, infinitely built upon, it seemed. For all time and in all places, however, we boundaried humans have allowed the law to set boundaries on the infinite. We've used the law as an endpoint rather than as a launching pad. And this is sin, to limit God to the law. In Jesus' ministry, he always breaks boundaries set by the law when love requires it. Yet he reminds us that he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And in the season of Epiphany, we remember through Jesus' life that God came into the world in order to bring all people to himself. We realize the expansiveness of God's transforming love. For God made us for God's freedom in him. We can believe that our future is revealed within the constraints of the past. It's tempting to look to the past and say, how are we going to make a future? And that's what the law does. We say, what does the law permit? Or is there any loophole which we can pass through so that we can make the future that we want? And if we're honest, every single one of us has considered this. Every single one of us, we have tax season coming up, right? And so we look in it and we say, where is there a loophole in the tax law that allows me to keep more of the money I've made so that I can create the future that I want with it? We have a vision for our future, and we find time and again that the law can't direct us there. It falls short. It doesn't take into consideration all the variables that we're considering. The boundaries, they just don't take into account all the variables that we're now relating to. Laws have been written with very specific people and circumstances in mind, and we realize that when we bump up against them. When we try to apply a particular law universally, we start to see its shortcomings in making a future. And that's what Jesus bumps into over and again in his ministry. When people ask him who they should give money to, or they ask him who has sinned, or they ask him how could someone eat with sinners and still call themselves clean? Or they challenge him on what day to heal someone. Always they're interacting with the law and its limits. We can use the law to defend our actions. We can say, I can't do that because, or I can do that because it's not illegal, or I can't do that because it is illegal. But we can also use our hope for the future to defend our actions. I'm doing this because it helps make the future that I'm wanting. And how is the future that I'm wanting making space for others as well? That's the question that ultimately tests the validity of the action. Is this freedom which gives freedom for all people? Constance Baker Motley is someone that we can claim she was an Episcopalian. I'm so thrilled that she was an Episcopalian, a Black American, a nutmegger, an Episcopalian. Did I mention that yet? She grew up at St. Luke's, New Haven. In that book is written her marriage to her husband. Her parents were immigrants from the Caribbean islands. She was first-generation American. It's interesting, in her Wikipedia page, it refers to her as African American, but she wasn't. She was a first-generation American. She was also the first Black woman appointed to the federal judiciary, serving as United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. She was elected borough president of Manhattan in 1965, the first Black woman, or the first woman to hold the office, and I'm sure the first Black woman as well. She handed down breakthrough decisions when she joined the federal judiciary. One of them you will remember tonight when you're watching the Super Bowl, because it was through her judgmentship that she ruled in favor of women in sports reporting from men's locker rooms. This was in 1978, perhaps you remember it. My mom remembers that. So when you look out on that field tonight and you see the women there talking to the coaches and stuff, it's because of Constance Baker Motley that was made possible. She was also the presiding judge on a case about women lawyers in prestigious law firms in Manhattan. They had claimed that they were being discriminated against because of their gender. And it's interesting because in that argument, people wanted her to recuse herself from judging this, being on the panel, because she was a woman. They were afraid she'd be biased. And she responded, well, if I'm biased because I'm a woman to women, then wouldn't men be biased to men because they're men? That's a mic drop kind of question. She won. The person who was arguing for permission to be in these high-level law firms, they won their right. So if you're a woman in law, then you too have Constance Baker Motley to thank. And we can remember her especially because she has a stamp. It just came out. Look at how much her life has affected us. I really could talk for like 25 minutes up here about her, but because I love you, I'm not going to. I'm just going to encourage you to go to her Wikipedia page and follow some of the links. I recommend the book Civil Rights Queen, which is all about her life if you want to hear more about what she did. In her story, we recognize that the law can't get us to our future. It only keeps us, or tries to keep us, as Paul describes in his letter to the Galatians, from messing up. It's like a babysitter or a nanny or a tutor. And when we grow up, we take what we learned from our guardian so that we can imagine a new future, determining who we will follow. Constance Baker Motley wanted the law to be a better guardian for humanity. So here's the quote from the start. One of the most important things that I take from Black history is that Black communities have always been futurists. Because of the way that the rules have been rigged against our communities, we've been forced to imagine a new future with possibilities for freedom. Those are words of Alicia Garza. So back to Constance Baker Motley. She was the lead lawyer on James Meredith's case to enter into the University of Mississippi. She was the first Black woman ever to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And in the book, Civil Rights Queen, you hear of the difficulties of that journey in fighting for Meredith. For he was permitted to enter the University of Mississippi, but because of the color of his skin and the ways that Blackness had been dehumanized, he was segregated and separated. And he was weary from the fight. He was in his early 20s. He didn't like having a room all by himself. He didn't like having to eat in a particular place, not in the same dining commons as others. According to the book, he just said to Constance Baker Motley, I just want to go home. I want to go dancing. She fought for him and fought with him for the sake of all people. So what do we do when the boundaries keep us from our full humanity? For those of you who feel like the boundaries don't diminish your humanness, who have felt only freedom within them, I would take this to mean that they were written with your particular circumstances in mind, and that's lovely. But for those whose humanity has been diminished, then we have to consider where the law assists or needs to be changed. For there are laws written that say you can't go there, you can't do that, you can't have that. Other humans can, but not you. And the dialogue that comes from this conflict centers around whether the perceived threat to the community is real, and how is it that we make a way forward for us all to be together. Black history reminds me that the law of freedom didn't come first for Black Americans. An imagined future came first, and then the laws had to be considered as to whether or not they help us reach the imagined future. Part of the pain of studying Black history is the discovery of how intentionally laws were written to wipe out Black people's humanity. It is painful to see people be that cruel. And it is painful when any one of us sees how we may have benefited from that cruelty. So what does this have to do with our text this morning? The scriptures show us that God is showing us a new future, which can break the boundaries of the past. God has been doing that for all time. God initiates this longing for freedom in us, and God shows us how God will deliver us into that new reality through miracles. The words sometimes just don't describe it well enough. Maybe magic is what it is better described as. When we read this story of Elijah in the Old Testament lesson from 2 Kings today, you see how life-changing his life was. It was epic. You can read about it in 2 Kings, but here's a little summary from Ecclesiasticus, which is found in the Apocrypha. Then Elijah arose, a prophet like fire, and his word burned like a torch. He brought a famine upon them, and by his zeal he made them few in number. By the word of the Lord he shut up the heavens, and also 3 times brought down fire. How glorious you were, Elijah, in your wondrous deeds. Whose glory is equal to yours? You raised a corpse from death and from Hades by the word of the Most High. You sent kings down to destruction and famous men from their sickbeds. You heard rebuke at Sinai and judgments of vengeance at Horeb. You anointed kings to inflict retribution and prophets to succeed you. You were taken up by a whirlwind of fire and a chariot with horses of fire. At the appointed time, it is written, you are destined to calm the wrath of God before it breaks out in fury, to turn the hearts of parents to their children, and to restore the tribes of Jacob. Happy are those who saw you and were adorned with your love. I'm telling you, it's epic. It defies description. A chariot of fire and horses taken up into the heaven? Really? Well, I don't know. How else would I describe it? It was beyond comprehension. Words are boundaries too. But this is the person, Elijah, who shows up along with Moses. And Moses, whose face shone with the glory of the Lord when he had that face-to-face union with him at Mount Horeb, when he was given the law. Moses, whose face shone with the glory of the Lord to such an extent that people could not look upon him. So in our gospel lesson today, Peter just doesn't know what to do with this. I don't even have words, in essence, he says. He could only go back to the past. Let us build 3 dwelling places here. But God says, I'm doing a new thing. And this is my son, my beloved. Listen to him. And so as they journey down the mountain, they are charged by Jesus not to tell anyone until after he has raised from the dead, which I'm sure for them was another perplexing question or statement. Raised from the dead? I don't even know what you mean. How is it that we prepare for what God has to offer us in this new imagined future? We do it just by one step at a time. This passage from the Old Testament became very real to me on the death of my late spiritual director, which was in February of 2020. I'm sure those of you that have been around a while have heard me mention Tina before because she was so transformational in my life, bringing me healing and restoration in ways I didn't even know I could have in the life of faith. She taught me that my prayer life didn't start with me. It started with God. God's prayer was in me. Never thought of that before. Changed my life. She taught me how to look at the abundance of God and the infiniteness of God. And I relied on her month in and month out for years. Even coming here to Connecticut, we met by phone. There were occasions when she would tell me things that she had told me before. And I was saying, oh my gosh, you've told me that before. I can't believe I didn't remember it. Where can I write this down to remember it? Because I think this is like the 5th time. You know that feeling? When you think, surely I can learn this now. Why am I on the 5th time? And so I came to rely on her in certain ways, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what will I do when she's gone? Because if only I can hear it from her, or she's the one telling me, who will tell me if she's not here to tell me? And so it is that life does not last on this earth forever, and she did die right before the pandemic became a public and worldwide thing. And I remember being surprised that I had received her blessing. I could understand this Old Testament story with Elijah going up into the heavens and Elisha receiving the mantle of that prophet, because I could feel Tina with me in a way that I didn't know I would get to have. I could remember the things she said to me in a way that I didn't know I could ever remember when she was with me on this earth. So it brings us to this question as we reflect on these miracles, or was it magic? Who knows? Words don't work for this stuff. But we know that they're true. Am I ready to receive the blessings? That's the spiritual question for each of us. Or is my spiritual life so cluttered up with laws that there's no room? Will I believe the blessing if it's handed to me? I know in my own life, I've received something and I've said, this is it. And it's as if God says, you know what, never mind, I don't think you're ready. I'm like, no, I'm ready, I want it. I'll take it. Even though it doesn't look what I thought the blessing would look like. Will I believe the blessing if it's handed to me? Will I clean my spiritual house so that I've made room for the blessing to abide and flourish within me? The season of Lent is about cleaning house. It's our opportunity to say, oh my gosh, this place is a mess. Through the liturgy of Ash Wednesday and the first Sunday of Lent, when we do the Great Litany, we begin to assess the mess. The words help us recognize all the little places and piles that we have hoarded away who we think God is and how that God works in the world. And we begin to notice that we can clean that out. I can give that up, throw it away, dust it out. I want to be ready for the blessings. And so, my friends, we gather together through all of these rituals of this season so that it prepares us for the blessing in a way that Elisha showing up following Elijah made him ready, in a way that Tina got me ready to receive her blessing before I even knew it was coming. How are we ready to receive the blessings that God has to give to us for a new future, a future of freedom and love and joy in community, where all God's children are blessed? In the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Amen.